Hello, these are my hands. My voice is over here somewhere. This is my trusty Synthstrom Deluge, and here is an Arturia Minilab MK3 MIDI controller that I thought would be a good companion for today's topic, which is MIDI Follow in the Deluge community firmware. Finally, MIDI Follow is something I've kind of hinted at talking about or asked if I should talk about for a long time, and I've used it a lot in any demo videos I've done using the Deluge with other equipment because it's super useful, but I've never really gotten around to it, and a couple folks have asked for a more in-depth video featuring MIDI Follow, so here we are. That said, Ron Cavagnaro has obviously done a bunch of videos on MIDI Follow and other features as well, so check his channel out, especially if you use grid mode, which I don't, but the internet's a big place and we all learn and explain things differently, so I figured there was still room for me to show how I use MIDI Follow and why it's one of my favorite kind of unsung heroes of the community firmware. Disclaimer off the top, of course, I am not a developer. I had nothing to do with MIDI Follow or any of the other great community features. I'm also not affiliated with Synthstrom. I'm just doing this video for fun because a couple people have asked for it, and I think MIDI Follow deserves the spotlight. I hang out on the Discord where all the smart people are and basically sponge off them, try to test here and there, but really do videos like this to help be part of the community and show off cool features. MIDI Follow was created by Sean Goodvibes on Discord. Sean is also active on the Facebook group. If you've ever asked a question about the community firmware, he's likely replied to you, as he's very passionate about making sure everyone gets along with community firmware and pushing the Deluge as far as it can go, just like all the other volunteer devs who do this for free in their spare time, which is amazing. So thanks to all the devs and Sean specifically for MIDI Follow. It's made my life a lot easier when it comes to connecting the Deluge to other equipment. Okay, enough talking, but more talking while I demo actually this time. So in the past on official firmware, and some of you may still be on the Synthstrom official firmware, in order to get a controller keyboard to play an internal synth on the Deluge, you would have to learn the connection between the two devices. So I've got my Synth 0 open here, and I'll press Learn, the audition pad, they'll start blinking, and now I play chords or notes on this Arturia keyboard, and you see the audition pads turn white and start flashing. Now when I play, my F major chord plays Synth 0. Let's turn it to 0A because it's a little less grating maybe. There we go, okay. So there's Synth 0 playing via Arturia. This is connected via USB MIDI, by the way. There's a little MIDI hub back there, and then it goes into the Deluge via USB. So you don't see any DIN cables or anything. That's just because the Deluge is acting as the host in this case. So that's what you'd have to do. And that's still very useful. Learning MIDI directly to a specific parameter or synth is still very handy, but it gets convoluted when you want to jump around to other synth presets or other sounds with the same controller keyboard. To demonstrate that, let's create another synth. We'll scroll back one to, here's something I made for the preset competition, Windy Landscape. So a lot of kind of LFO flourishes and stuff. So here, I want to play that. Oh wait, that's still Synth 0. Okay, so that means, right, I didn't learn it. Okay, so learn, audition pads. There we go. Okay, there you hear something different, right, than Synth 0. But Synth 0 is still under there. Of course it is, because learning this one didn't overwrite the old one, it just added to it, which is kind of cool. You can stack synth sounds by learning multiple things to the same keyboard, but in this case, I don't want Synth 0 still playing. I want to just play this Windy Landscape. So what I have to do is unlearn Synth 0, and you can do that from Song View, which is where I live most of the time. So hit Learn, and you'll see the rows that have been learned. These synths that have been learned via the audition pads will blink in Song View, and you can simply press the one you want to unlearn. Okay, so now we only have Windy Landscape, which is what we wanted. But now, let's say I want to go back to Synth 0 because I want to play a different part or replay the part. You can see where this is going. I have to now unlearn Windy Landscape, and I can relearn Synth 0 just from Song View by holding Learn and pressing the row that it corresponds to. And now you see that lights up again. Now Synth 0 is back, right? So we're all set again, but you can see how that becomes a little cumbersome, especially in a live setting. If you're jumping around to a lot of different sounds, you don't have enough hands or enough time between bars if you're trying to time something live. So MIDI Follow swoops in and saves the day here a little bit. So let's get that going, and I can show you what I mean. First of all, I will unlearn anything we've got going on here. So now there's nothing playing. And let's go into the MIDI Follow setup menu. So if I press Shift and select, we're in the global settings menu, scroll to MIDI, select that, and now you have your MIDI options, and you'll see Follow, F-O-L-O, on the 7-segment display. On OLED, I assume it actually says follow, but Follow, as I like to say it, you select there, and that gives you your MIDI Follow options. There are some in here we'll go over later, and some we may not have time for, but the most important one is channel. And if you select that, you see you have A, B, C, and that means you have 3 different options for setting a MIDI Follow device channel. Personally, I've never really needed more than one, because any device I use is also very easy to set the channel on the device itself. So I believe you have the extra options in case you really need a specific channel for certain devices. Let's say it's hard to change the channel on a device. But in my case, I only have this controller set up, and I only need channel A. So we see what that is by pressing through. You see it says 10. Now, there are 2 things I can do here. I can either easily set the Minilab to channel 10 via its interface, or I can hit Learn and play a note on the Minilab. Well, you'll see it was on channel 11. So channel A just switched to channel 11 automatically, because that's what the Minilab is on. So now our MIDI Follow is set to channel 11, just like our Minilab. Now, when I go into Synth 0, you'll see no blinking pads, nothing is learned. I didn't have to do anything. Synth 0 just plays, which is great. Now when I go out to song view, Synth 0 is still playing because it's the active clip, which we'll get into in a second. But if I click into Windy Landscape there, suddenly Synth 0 is gone and Windy Landscape is playing, because it is now the active clip, because we're in Windy Landscape as in clip view. It's the active clip. When I go out to song view, it's still the most recently active clip. So it will remember which one you last engaged with, and that is the active clip. And you can change that directly from song view as well. So if I don't want to go into a clip specifically, but let's say I'm just checking out, what is this one again? I forget. Oh, right, it's Synth 0. Now it's the active clip, and so on. Okay, just there's Windy Landscape again. So you don't actually have to go into the clip to change which one's active and play it, which is very cool. So hopefully you can kind of see where this is going and how convenient MIDI Follow can be, because we're already not having to unlearn a million things. You can still learn if you want, say, to stack things, or you have a specific controller you want to use, but you don't have to. MIDI Follow kind of follows you around the active states and lets you control whatever you're looking at or what you were last looking at. So obviously the other clip type that this is really beneficial for is kits. So let's create a new kit. I'll scroll back one to a collection of pocket operator sounds, I believe, that I like to use for more gritty percussion. Now you'll notice I haven't learned anything yet, but now that the kit is the active clip, the MIDI controller via MIDI Follow already knows what I want to do here. And more importantly, in this case with the Minilab, the pads are automatically mapped as well. So that's super handy. Now, in my case, the Minilab has an app, a companion app, the MIDI Control Center, where I can do some setup in advance depending on how I'd like this to work. So I could select these pads and make them a different MIDI channel than the keyboard, and then I could learn each individual kit item to one of these pads, and they'd always be active for me no matter what clip I was in. But that's a bit cumbersome, and kind of MIDI Follow just kind of makes this so much easier. So I've left the pads set up to be the same MIDI channel as the keyboard. That's why I can play them both. And then MIDI Follow kind of does the rest for me. So now I have velocity sensitive pads to play with the Deluge. Now, where the keyboard comes in is you can set which root note you'd like your kit to start at. So for example, Shift, select again into MIDI Follow. And then you see there's channel, which is what I was on before, but then there's also kit. If I select kit, it says the number 48, which this number corresponds to the root note on your keyboard. In this case, I believe it's C3, which is here. Now, if I wanted, let's say I had an 88 key MIDI controller and I wanted to put my drums all the way to the end on either side, I could select the corresponding root note that would start my kick drum or whatever is the lowest kit item. and then they'd follow up the keyboard from there. So in this case, you'll see this is my eighth sound, and it lands after 8 is G. So there you go. C to G is my kit here, but I can move that around using the root kit note parameter in the MIDI Follow menu. So hopefully that's clear and you can see how this could be useful. Okay, so let's actually put this into practice and make something with it. So I've got our kit here. Let's get a metronome going using the closed hi-hat sounds. I believe I've got 2 bars. We'll put 8th note closed hi-hats. I like to use the closed hi-hats as a metronome rather than the stock metronome sound, as it just sounds less kind of abrasive and metronome-y. But we've got that now. We're at a tempo that is higher than I normally work in. I wanted to try something a little faster today just for fun because, I make enough slow ambient music on the Deluge anyway. And then we've got our windy landscape. We'll extend this to 4 bars. And now when I play, I've got that metronome. Now we can play some chords here. Okay, there we go. So we're already started here. We've got our kind of pad sound and our hats. Let's get something more interesting going here via MIDI Follow. Notice I haven't learned anything. I'm just changing clips. Now, I'm not a finger drummer, so let's see how this goes. Actually, wasn't too bad. Some human time at the end there, which I think I'll keep. And I should say I've got the compressors engaged. So this kit has a compressor on it, just with a tiny amount of threshold dialed in, just to catch any peaks and keep things under wraps a little bit. And then I'll do the master compressor for the whole track. We'll just a small amount, just to get a little bit of kind of safety for us there, and a little glue. Okay, so we've got something going on here. Okay, we need to add something more to make this interesting, but you'll notice first we have a bunch of unused controller options by way of these faders and encoders, but MIDI Follow can also make use of those. It's not just about pads and keys. In fact, MIDI Follow comes with a preset kind of default mapping of MIDI CCs that you can make use of with your controller. And the way it's been done is pretty clever because I didn't realize there's kind of somewhat of a standardized set of CC numbers that are often mapped to certain parameters. For example, when I look at the MIDI Follow default implementation, it has mapped the low frequency cutoff for the Deluge synth to CC74. I didn't have to do that. And I've noticed on other synths, it seems like that low frequency cutoff is often mapped to CC74. So some of that's already been done for you. And you may find out of the box, you can just control things already, which is great. But you may also need to make some changes like I did, and you have some options. In my case, for example, you can use the software that comes with your controller and look at the default MIDI implementation. I'll show the chart on the screen somewhere here, and it's also in the documentation in the description. But you could look at the CC numbers that were chosen in the default MIDI Follow implementation, and then use your controller software to map there, which is what I've done here. So this is in my Deluge template on the Arturia Minilab. These two are mapped to cutoff and resonance for the low pass. Here's cutoff and resonance for high pass. I believe I've got some attack and release and some reverb and delay sends and things mapped in here as well. And you can do whatever you find most useful. The other option, of course, is when you install the community firmware, you will also now have a MIDI Follow XML file on your card, which I'll show on the screen here somewhere as well. And you could use a text editor like WordPad or Notepad or whatever you like to use to edit that and write your own CC numbers for the different parameters. Let's say you have a controller that's got a specific mapping you like, or it's not very editable on the unit itself, but you know the CCs it's sending, you can map those via the XML file as well. So you have options to customize MIDI Follow to your needs. Okay, enough talking again. Let's put this into practice with a sort of bass or lead line. I've got this Sawborg preset that I made for the competition recently as well. We'll extend it to 4 bars, press play and record, and I'll play some notes in keeping with what we've already played. Close enough. It'll work. Now let's add a bit of side chain to let that kick come through. In fact, let's go back to our kit for a second. Again, MIDI follows, letting me just jump around there. Let's add a hit here. And then we'll extend this and get rid of a couple of those in the middle so that it's less repetitive. And now we've got a bit more kind of character happening. I've added some reverb to the master. We've got our compressor on a little bit as well. But now, like I said, the whole point was to demonstrate these other control parameters we've got here. So here's our low pass. And you notice I didn't learn that. I promise I didn't do it while you weren't looking. Here's our resonance. And then, you know, high pass resonance. And then I've got these mapped to some other things as well. Let's say, you know, you want some delay. I don't really want delay on my bass, but there we've got it if we wanted it. So now when I go out, I still have control over that low pass, for example, on this bass. Even when I'm in song view, which is cool. And now if I go to my kit, I've got effect entire on. I can do the same thing here. Low pass the whole kit. Bring up the resonance. In fact, why don't we copy this kit, change the preset, bring it in, and I'll do that exact thing. There, effect entire. Now I'll add some delay to this one. Maybe a little crunch. Bring up the high pass. We can even mess with the overall pitch. It's got some thump to it. Okay, so now we've got something interesting happening here. And you know, we're using MIDI Follow with these parameters in the active step, taking over without having to learn everything. It's very convenient, right? Okay, there's something else we can do though. And that is, we can still use standard MIDI Learn to learn a parameter to one of our controls here if we want to always have access to it. And then when we jump around, MIDI Follow will do everything else, but we can still have constant access to, say, a certain parameter. So you can use them in tandem, which is really fun. For example, let's say I want to always have easy access to the master reverb amount on the entire track. So to do that, I'll press Select in our song menu now, FX, Reverb, Amount, and now I press Learn and say turn this guy up here, and you see Learn flashes. So now my reverb amount, you'll see the lights and the parameter value changing there. My reverb amount is controlled constantly by this knob. So to put that into practice, right? Now, of course, right here in song view, it's not very handy because I can just do that right here. But let's say I'm back into my bass or this new kit that I made, and I'm controlling, and I still want to be able to up the master song reverb. So you can see, you can kind of mix and match and still use both. So I've got higher resonance and now high reverb on everything. And I can dial it all back or up depending on how I feel. So hopefully that's obvious that you can have some power by mixing and matching MIDI Follow with traditional MIDI Learn depending on the controls on your MIDI controller. There's something else we can do, and it's the reason I've left this blank space since the beginning. I hope it goes without saying that MIDI Follow also works seamlessly with external equipment connected to the Deluge via MIDI. To prove that, I've got this little Fred's Lab Töörö, however you say it, I'm not sure. Deluge, Deluge, they're best friends already. They got the same little matching screens. So cute. Anyway, I picked this up secondhand as a companion for the Deluge. It's a 4-part, 6-voice, multi-timbral synth made in France, I believe, or the UK, somewhere. And It seems like a good companion to the Deluge. I'm still learning how to use it, but it's tiny and will fit on the desk in this setup, so it's perfect. Connected via USB MIDI, just like the Minilab is, into a little hub in back of the Deluge there. And now all we have to do is create a brand new MIDI track. Channel 1 will do, and you'll see that I can play the Töörö. In any case, there it is. I'll go up an octave. I'm still learning sound design on this. I like the interface, and I do find it kind of fun and easy to use, but I've only had it for a little bit, so we're still getting along with it. But here we go. It's ready. I didn't have to learn anything. We've got our track primed and ready to go. Let's play some notes. There you go. The Töörö is already part of the family. So now I can also do the same things here that I was doing via the controls. Now, coincidentally, like I said, I haven't changed the setup on my Minilab for the Töörö, but it is connected and has the same CC74 for its filter cutoff. So I told you, sometimes it's kind of standard, and that's why certain things were chosen in the default MIDI Follow implementation. So here you go, I've got resonance and cutoff immediately. Now these ones, this one I believe is different. This is mapped to pan, as you can hear in headphones. I've just kind of made you seasick. But with the Minilab, I can create templates. So I created one for, as you can see, sometimes the faders don't want to stop wiggling, and that's a bit of a weird Minilab thing. But I have a Töörö template, and now I have these guys mapped to cutoff and resonance like we had, and then this one is now mapped to the cutoff of the shaper envelope or filter. And then there's other things, like here's our delay mix and feedback. So we can mess around. There's some, I believe, LFO 1 and 2 speed there. So anyway, I created a quick template there to use, and that's just still all going through MIDI Follow with MIDI through on, so that the Minilab can talk to the Töörö with the Deluge communicating in between. So there we go. We can get our stuff going back. Now my human playing is still a bit off. I can change my quantize settings a little bit if we wanted to. But let's go back to my Deluge program, and I still have control over that reverb. The Töörö is not going through the Deluge for audio in this case, so it won't be affected by the reverb, but as we bring back everything else, this isn't the best jam in the world, but you know, hopefully it's kind of fun and not annoying to listen to. In any case, we've got something going on here, and MIDI Follow is making it all happen. So hopefully I've shown off a bit of the potential and why I consider MIDI Follow to be one of my unsung favorite features of the community firmware, because it just makes life so easy when it comes to connecting your Deluge to external equipment. Something I didn't really do a lot of, but I'm doing more and more now as I accumulate more fun little pieces of gear. So MIDI Follow can be your best friend. That may be the title of the video. Let's see. Now, I guess before I wrap things up, I should show you some of the other MIDI Follow options. So Shift, Select, MIDI, Follow, I never get tired of that. And Kit, we've already gone through. Channel, we've gone through. So you select your channel there, your root note for your kit items there. Feedback is you can select the channel via ABC. You can map it to the same channels as your main MIDI Follow channels if you want. If you have a controller that you would want to show feedback where you've changed something on the Deluge and you want it to kind of feed back to your controller, I don't use that at the moment. Display can be useful depending. So that on the 7-segment display is less useful, but that will show on the display when I'm turning something over here, the Deluge display will engage. 7-segment display, there's such little real estate. I don't usually turn this on because there's only so much I have room to show. So, but you may want that, especially if you have an OLED display. So there you go, your MIDI Follow items. And that brings us to one other thing that is not necessarily MIDI Follow related, but you'll probably want to mess with. And that is your takeover settings for your MIDI controls. So you'll notice when I'm messing around with various things here, I've got, let's mute the Töörö for now. say I've got my bass cut off, resonance, whatever. Oh, this is the kit. Sorry, I've got this kit. Now if I drop it lower, and then when I go to this kit, there's no jumping of value. It's not jarring when I change. And that's all related to your MIDI takeover settings. And you have options there too. I'll just go over them briefly because there are several. But if you go to Shift, Select, and not MIDI this time, or actually, sorry, yes, MIDI, but not follow this time. You go scroll through and you'll see takeover. That's what that says. I believe it's TOVR in 7-segment language. So that would be takeover. On OLED, it'll probably say takeover, not over. But it's fun this way for me. So you select that, and this decides what happens when you turn or a knob or move a fader when it's a different track now than it was before. So your parameters will jump or won't. So I have it set to scale, which means that it's going to make it as smooth as possible and use whatever runway is left on either side of my fader or encoder so that it'll automatically kind of adjust and lower in a smooth way. There's also relative, which I'm not quite sure how it works. I think you have to have a certain MIDI controller set up to make this work. You can look into that yourself. Jump is hopefully obvious. It jumps. So if I grab the fader, it's automatically going to jump immediately to that level, and it could sound jarring. And then there's pickup, which is classic as well. If you want it to not do anything until you've crossed through where the old value was. So you'd have to maybe do a lot of this to get it which is kind of an old way to do it, but it can work depending on your setup. But I usually leave it on scale because that kind of does some clever math on how much runway I have left. And say in my filter cutoff here, I could lower it and it will just automatically use whatever amount of the fader value is left to dictate the value that's changing on the particular track I'm on, without jumping or needing me to pick up to the final value. So it's a clever way to smooth out changes between tracks if you're jumping around with MIDI Follow. So change your MIDI takeover setting depending on how you like it with your controller. So that's about it. I'm rambling again. Let's just make some noise and I'll play some weird controller settings as we fade out and you go about your day. Hopefully you got something out of this. MIDI Follow is super cool, very helpful in day-to-day life. It's not as sexy as, say, a new reverb or whatever, but if you're someone who uses the Deluge with other gear, it's a lifesaver. So I really appreciate it. Thanks again to all the hardworking community firmware developers and Sean Goodvibes in particular with the work on MIDI Follow here. And if you have any questions, there's other features that you want me to look at, or maybe other pieces of equipment I haven't looked at, or other Deluge companions that I don't have, let me know, and I'm happy to look into things. I'm always out for interesting things to try out. So thanks for sticking around if you made it this far, and hopefully it was helpful in some way.